I have really appreciated being here this weekend. And I want to thank you, all of you, for letting me be a part just to watch you interact with each other. I've got a great amount of pleasure watching you play and watching you worship and just watching how you interact. This morning I got up early and I was down by the lake and I was struck by a couple of things. It was just a pristine kind of sight. And the lake was like glass. It reflected the trees and the sky. But the thing that struck me was that when God created the sun and the moon and the stars, and He created the seasons, the beauty of the fall, pristine places like this. And when we got through with all that, He created one more thing, the apex of His creation. He created you. You. And while all of nature can do a lot of stuff, it can show us something of God's beauty and His creativity and His power. His image is only found in one place, in a reflection of the human beings that sit around you right now. There's nothing quite as exquisite as a man or a woman. It says, in the beginning, God created them in His image, male and female. It just struck me this morning. Don't ever forget that you are created in the image of God. And every person here, every decision you make is either clarifying that image so that it's easier to see God in you, or it's clouding that image so it becomes more difficult to see God in you. But what I have found this weekend, as I watched you, that I have been struck by the beauty of God Himself. And for that I am always grateful when I get to see that. Well, this weekend we are taking a look at the foundational evidence for our faith. Oh, and some of you have asked me, how did you learn all this stuff? And I'll tell you, it's not that hard, really. About 15 years ago, I figured it out, that if I read a little more than 10 pages a day, about 100 pages a week, whatever it is, then in 10 years, I'll be 50,000 pages smarter. That's what I figured. So about 15 years ago, I started doing that. So I hardly ever miss a week where I read less than 100 pages of something. And it's usually pertaining to this. So I gathered it over time. But like anything else in my life, I do it just a little bit at a time. I don't bite off too much. Well, we looked at the foundational evidence behind the existence of God, that God has given us evidence from within and from without. We looked last night at the credibility of the Bible. And this morning we get to talk about Jesus. Is Jesus for real? Jesus is a remarkable figure. He came on the scene 2,000 years ago, born to a poor peasant family in an obscure village in one of the smallest countries in the world. He never traveled more than about 100 miles from where he was born. He lived approximately 33 years, of which only the last 3 years of his life comprised his entire public ministry. And yet people everywhere still remember him. And I mean everywhere. He dates today's newspaper. It's September 28th, 2003 A.D., in the year of our Lord. And all over the world, he dates today's newspaper. H.G. Wells, the historian, when he was asked, who's the greatest person who ever lived? H.G. Wells says, if you test by historical standards, Jesus Christ stands first. Kenneth Scott Latouré, who's a Yale professor, or was a professor at Yale and a historian, he said, as the centuries pass, the evidence continues to accumulate that based on his impact on the world, Jesus Christ is the most influential life ever lived on this planet. Have you ever stopped to think the impact that Jesus has had in every area of life? It's hard to find an area of life that He hasn't impacted. Take social reform. Jesus taught and He cared for the downtrodden and the outcast. He taught His followers to do the same. Now, you go all over the world, you find orphanages that are built by followers of Jesus Christ, staffed by followers of Jesus Christ. Famine relief centers, staffed by people of Jesus who are followers of Jesus. Rescue centers, the Haven of Rest, downtown Akron, and thousands of other rescue centers like that. Those are Jesus followers. In social reform, Christians are the ones that pushed through the abolition of slavery, pushed through child labor laws, because they were followers of Jesus. Take medicine. Jesus healed the sick and the infirmed and the diseased. Now, you can't go to a country in the world and not find a hospital that's built by followers of Jesus Christ, staffed by followers. The Red Cross, the international center of people who go and help people in distress, began by followers of Jesus Christ. Business. The followers of Jesus Christ were taught the sanctity of human labor, and it was partially that work ethic that built the greatness of this country. Business ethics find as their foundation the teachings of Jesus. More and more you're seeing books that pop up on business shelves. Jesus, CEO, how to treat your employees like Jesus would treat them. Science, some of the greatest scientists in the world were followers of Jesus. Roger Bacon, Copernicus, Galileo, Blaise Pascal, Isaac Newton, to name a few. But no one impacted the arts like Jesus Christ. Rembrandt, Da Vinci, Michelangelo, Bach, Beethoven, Handel, Dante, Raphael, Milton. The list goes on. What is it about Jesus that made him stand out so much that 2,000 years later, people still talk about him? Well, what I want to do is I'm going to divide this into three categories. One I'm going to call the outrageous claim. Two, the outstanding proof. And three, the amazing offer. And that's what I think makes Jesus stand out. First, the outrageous claim. Jesus was different than any other religious leader. Because other religious leaders would say, follow me and I'll show you the way to truth. Jesus said simply, I am the truth. Other religious leaders say, follow me and I'll show you God. Jesus said, when you have seen me, you have seen the Father. The thing that made Jesus stand out is that he claimed to be God himself. That was his outrageous claim. Every once in a while I meet somebody that says, oh no, Jesus didn't claim to be God. His followers claimed he was God. Absolutely untrue. Jesus made no bones about it. Jesus said, to see me is to see God. To believe in me is to believe God. To know me is to know God. To hate me is to hate God. To love me is to love God. He said all those things. Jesus claimed that he was divine. In Mark chapter 2, Jesus forgives sins, which is a prerogative only God has. But Jesus claimed he had the authority as well to forgive someone of their sins. In John chapter 20, when Thomas bows to Jesus and worships him, Jesus accepts the worship. And you can assume that he felt like it was an absolutely appropriate thing to do. Oh no, Jesus made no bones about being divine. That's why we have to ask the question, is Jesus for real? Because it's one thing to say those things. It's a whole other ballgame to prove it. And that's what we want to see, if Jesus really did prove that he was who he said he was. Oh, one thing. If you're here and you think, or you hear people say, I don't really believe that Jesus was God's son, but I believe he was a great moral teacher. That's an option Jesus didn't seem like he left open. Because to say what Jesus said, to make those claims, which he made over and over again, when Jesus claimed to be the exclusive way to God in John 14:6, he said, I am the way, the truth, and life. No one comes to the Father but through me. Somebody who makes those claims is either a megalomaniac like David Koresh, Jim Jones, Charles Manson, who all claim to be divine. Or they're crazy as a loon, or they really are who they say they are. But Jesus didn't leave any middle ground so somebody could say, it's so funny to me that so many people say that, oh, I believe Jesus was a great moral teacher. No, he wasn't. C.S. Lewis says if he was not God, then he was on the level of a man who says he's a poached egg. Because what he said was just so outrageous to claim to be God.